Have you ever thought you were helping someone, only to realize you might be crossing a line you didn't even know existed? That moment when your intentions collide with someone else's world, their culture, their feelings, and suddenly, everything you thought you knew about right and wrong feels twisted. This is that story. I never considered myself a meddling mum. I've always tried to give my son space, to guide without hovering, to care without suffocating. But that afternoon, as I glanced at Nina sitting quietly on the couch in our living room, I realized how little I truly understood about what was happening in her head. My son, Jamie, was upstairs finishing homework. At least that's what I assumed. I was about to drive both of them to a friend's birthday party, a small gathering, nothing that should have caused tension, yet the air felt heavy, almost electric, with an invisible charge I couldn't explain. Nina had always been a whirlwind of energy. From the moment she stepped into our home a few weeks ago, she radiated confidence and charm that was hard to ignore. Her laughter was loud, uninhibited, and infectious. Her stories came fast, tumbling over each other like a cascade of small waterfalls, each one revealing glimpses of a personality vibrant and Watching Jamie light up around her made my chest swell with a mix of joy and nostalgia. He was so clearly happy, so alive in a way that made my motherly heart skip a beat. For a fleeting moment, I thought, maybe this is all it takes. Find someone who makes you feel seen and let them be. Yet today, sitting across from her, I noticed something had shifted. There was a hesitance in her smile, a slight downturn at the corners of her lips that almost went unnoticed if you weren't paying close attention. Her hands fiddled with the hem of her t-shirt as she stared at the floor. The playful sparkle in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a wary caution that tugged at me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't just her expression, her entire presence had changed. The vibrant, self-assured teen I had observed in the past few weeks seemed to have shrunk slightly in her own skin, as if she were trying to make herself smaller to fit a mold I didn't even know existed. I noticed the other subtle cues too. Her hair, once hidden beneath stylish wigs she wore with pride, now fell naturally, unstyled, almost flat. There was no trace of the light makeup she sometimes applied, a touch of gloss on her lips, a hint of shimmer on her eyelids. The little earrings she favored, small silver studs that caught the light just enough to hint at playfulness, were absent. It struck me only slowly that these changes were connected to her apparent withdrawal, a silent conversation with the world around her, one she had chosen not to voice. I had to know what was going on. My maternal instincts kicked in, the same ones that had always reminded me to check in on Jamie whenever he seemed off. Only this time, it wasn't Jamie, it was Nina. I crouched slightly so that I was at her level, forcing myself to keep my voice calm and gentle. "Nina," I began, "you've been quiet today. Is everything okay?" She didn't look up immediately, and for a moment I feared I had pushed too hard. Then, slowly, her eyes met mine, filled with a hesitation I hadn't seen before. I don't feel pretty," she whispered. The words landed like heavy stones in my chest. I knew adolescence was tough, the pressure to look a certain way, to fit in, to impress peers, to navigate first crushes and social dynamics. But hearing it from Nina, in that moment, it felt sharper, somehow cutting through the easy assumptions I'd made about confidence and self-expression. I leaned back slightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why do you feel that way, sweetie?" My heart was pounding, an odd mix of empathy and unease. She swallowed hard, glancing at her hands again. "I'm still getting used to showing my natural hair," she admitted, almost in a rush, as if saying it out loud made it more real, more frightening. My mind instantly started spinning, trying to untangle the web of adolescence. First crushes, racial identity, and self-expression that this simple statement carried. "Why are you doing it then, if it makes you uncomfortable?" I asked, the question tumbling out before I could fully filter it. The words hung between us, a dangerous bridge between curiosity and intrusion. Her answer was quiet, almost hesitant. "Jamie, he thinks I look cooler this way." My chest tightened. Of course, I understood in theory every teen wants to feel accepted, to impress someone they liked. But there was something in the way she said it that set off a cascade of maternal concern and unease. I found myself remembering my own teenage years, the things I'd done, the sacrifices of comfort and authenticity I'd made just to catch someone's eye, just to feel noticed, just to feel like I belonged. I opened my mouth to offer reassurance. Almost reflexively, I used to do things just to impress boys when I was your age. You know, wearing makeup or trying to look different than how I felt inside. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I paused, sensing the delicate terrain I was treading. And if you want to wear a wig, that's okay too. You don't have to do it just because someone else thinks it's better. Her eyes flicked up at me briefly, searching, unsure, and for a moment, I thought I had struck the right balance. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet alarm began to sound. I was a white woman, offering advice to a black girl about her hair, about her appearance. And though my intentions were pure, I knew the landscape was fraught, layered with experiences and nuances I could never fully grasp. The air between us felt thick with unspoken tension, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of the weight your words might carry even before you speak them. The rest of the car ride that afternoon felt surreal, even though we hadn't left the driveway yet. I kept glancing at Nina, trying to gauge her mood without making it obvious. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window, as if she were hoping the scenery outside could distract her from the thoughts swirling inside her head. Jamie was still upstairs, oblivious to the storm gathering quietly in the living room. I wanted to tell him to take it easy, to be patient with her, but I knew this wasn't about him, it was about her confidence, about her right to feel comfortable in her own skin. I tried to ease into the conversation again, softer this time, more cautious. "You know, Nina," I said, keeping my voice even and warm, "it's okay to take your time getting used to how you look. You don't owe anyone a perfect image." She didn't reply, only shifted slightly, hugging her knees to her chest, a subtle motion that made my chest tighten. There was a vulnerability in her posture that went beyond the typical awkwardness of a 13-year-old girl. This was a girl negotiating the complicated intersection of self-image, adolescence, and cultural identity, all while trying to navigate a first crush. I remembered the mirrors in my own teenage bedroom, how I had spent hours perfecting hairstyles, makeup, outfits, just to feel like I belonged. But my teenage world, as confusing as it was, lacked the additional layer Nina was carrying, the weight of cultural expectations, the unspoken messages about what her natural hair meant in the eyes of society, and now in the eyes of someone she cared about deeply. I couldn't fully step into her shoes, but I wanted to offer a lifeline, some reassurance that didn't make her feel like she had to justify her choices to me or anyone else. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I don't know if I look right. Everyone else, they can just be themselves, but me, my hair, it's different. and I feel like I'm too much, or maybe not enough." Her words tumbled out in a rush, a fragile confession from a girl caught between worlds. I could see her struggling to articulate a feeling that was bigger than her age, a pressure she didn't even fully understand herself. "Being yourself doesn't mean being perfect," I said gently. "It means being honest with who you are, even when it's scary. If you like your natural hair, wear it. If you feel more comfortable in a wig, that's fine too, but make the choice for you, not for anyone else." I watched as she absorbed my words, a flicker of relief crossing her face, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a temporary bomb. The real challenge was far bigger than advice from a well-meaning adult. As we finally stepped into the car, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the side mirror, slightly hesitant, slightly unsure, but still a glimpse of the vibrant girl I had met weeks ago. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that she didn't have to carry the weight of expectation on her young shoulders. But I also knew that my words, despite their good intentions, might not land as I hoped. They were mine, filtered through my experiences as a white woman, and she had a world of her own that I could never fully navigate. Jamie finally emerged from upstairs, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation that had just taken place. He hopped into the car with an easy smile, teasing Nina about her choice of outfit for the party, and the tension in the back seat momentarily broke. But I could see the shadow of hesitation in Nina's eyes, the flicker of self-doubt that lingered. Despite Jamie's casual banter, it was in that moment, as I started the engine, that I realized how delicate this situation was. One wrong word, one misplaced gesture, and I could unintentionally deepen her insecurities instead of offering comfort. The drive to the party was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional traffic hum and Jamie's excited chatter. I kept stealing glances at Nina, trying to gauge whether my presence as an adult was a comfort or a source of pressure. Every small sigh, every downward glance, every subtle movement seemed magnified in my awareness. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, a mix of maternal concern and the acute awareness that I was navigating uncharted territory, both culturally and emotionally. By the time we pulled up to the party, I could feel the tension coiled tightly around Nina, like a spring ready to snap. She looked out the window at the small group of teens already gathered, adjusting her sleeves nervously. I could only offer a small, encouraging smile, hoping it would convey the support I felt, but never fully knew how to express. And in that instant, I knew that what I had thought would be a simple afternoon driving the kids to a party, chatting casually along the way, had become something far more complex, something that would challenge not just Nina's confidence, but my understanding of boundaries, culture, and the subtle lines between helping and overstepping. The party itself was a blur of neon lights and thumping music, the kind of suburban teen gathering where laughter, whispers, and the occasional shout collided into a chaotic soundtrack of adolescence. Jamie bounded out of the car first, practically, bouncing with energy, pulling Nina behind him. I could see the familiar sparkle return to her eyes for a fleeting second, that brief flicker of the confident, bubbly girl I had known, but it was just that, a flicker. As soon as she stepped onto the driveway, her shoulders hunched slightly, her gaze darting to the ground. It was as if the world outside the car was suddenly bigger, louder, and somehow less forgiving than the controlled environment of our living room. I stayed in the car for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to check something on my phone, while stealing glances at her. I noticed the subtle movements, the nervous adjustments of her hair, the way her fingers twisted in the fabric of her sweater. Every little motion screamed discomfort, but I also saw courage, the courage it took for a 13-year-old girl to step into a social setting while feeling exposed, judged, or just unsure. It was that courage I wanted to honor, that I wanted to support without smothering. I stepped out, offering a supportive nod. "You got this," I whispered, more to myself than to her. Nina gave a tiny smile, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for me to believe she had heard me. Jamie, completely oblivious to the tension undercurrents, draped his arm around her shoulders and led her inside. And then I did something I probably shouldn't have. Something that would later ignite a storm I wasn't ready for. I called her aside, away from the noise and friends, just for a moment. "Nina," I began carefully, choosing my words as if they were fragile glass. "I know it's scary to be yourself in front of everyone, but you're beautiful the way you are. You don't have to wear a wig or anything to make Jamie or anyone else happy. Just do what feels right for you." She froze, the tiniest hesitation, her mouth opening slightly before closing again. I thought I was helping, giving her permission to reclaim her confidence, to embrace herself. But instead of relief, I noticed a shadow cross her face, a subtle mix of confusion and embarrassment. I hadn't realized it, but my words had stepped into a territory I wasn't fully equipped to navigate. My voice, however well-intentioned, carried the weight of my own perspective as a white adult, and I had inadvertently stepped into a cultural space that wasn't mine to advise on. As I watched her, I felt a pang of worry. Had I overstepped? Was I unintentionally invalidating her choices, or worse, imposing my views on what it meant to be pretty or acceptable? I shook off the discomfort and reminded myself I was only trying to help, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Later that evening, after saying our goodbyes, I walked Jamie to the car, feeling the tension in the air that I hadn't anticipated. He was unusually quiet, fidgeting with his keys. "Mom, can we talk?" he finally said, his tone low but laced with frustration. My stomach sank. I had never seen him look so serious, so protective, so ready to confront me. Once inside the car, he let it out, the words tumbling over each other. "Why are you giving her advice about how she should look? You don't get it. You're a white woman. You have no idea what it's like to be her. You're acting like some Karen, telling her what's right for her." I was stunned. The word Karen landed like a punch, sharp and unfamiliar in this context, yet somehow perfectly fitting. My mouth went dry, my mind scrambling to process. I opened it to defend myself, to explain that I was only trying to help, to offer support, but Jamie wasn't having it. His eyes, usually so soft and playful, were hard, piercing, almost angry. And in that instant, I realized just how badly I had misstepped that night. Driving home, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Nina staring back at me, silently judging my interference. But she wasn't there. All that remained was a sinking feeling in my chest, a mix of guilt, confusion, and the stark awareness that sometimes even the purest intentions can lead to the most unexpected consequences. I had entered a world I didn't fully understand, guided only by good intentions and maternal instinct. And I had stumbled. By the time I parked the car in our driveway, I knew that tomorrow would be different. I would have to navigate the delicate terrain I had just disturbed, learn to respect boundaries I hadn't even considered, and hope that Nina and Jamie would understand that my intentions were never malicious, just misguided. The night air felt heavier than usual, carrying with it the weight of mistakes, misunderstandings, and the silent promise that things would never feel simple again. The next morning, I woke with a heavy sense of unease, replaying the previous evening over and over in my mind. The car ride to the party, the brief conversation with Nina, Jamie's sharp words, all of it lingered like smoke in the back of my brain, making it impossible to start the day normally. I had expected the incident to blow over, assuming that the awkward tension would fade with distance, but reality quickly proved me wrong. Jamie, normally cheerful and quick to share stories about school or video games, had barely looked me in the eye at breakfast. He pushed scrambled eggs round his plate, his movements mechanical, and I could see the simmering frustration that had erupted the night before wasn't gone, it was merely dormant, waiting for another spark. Nina, on the other hand, was nowhere in sight. I assumed she was still at home, but when I called her later to check if she was okay, her voice sounded quieter, more subdued than I had ever heard before. There was a hesitation in her tone, an almost imperceptible tremor that made my stomach knot. By mid-morning, I decided to stop guessing and go observe, in the gentlest way possible, what was happening with Nina. I didn't want to pry, but my instincts screamed that something deeper than mere teenage insecurity was at play. When I arrived at her house, I found her sitting on the edge of the couch, hair in its natural state, slightly disheveled, and without her usual sparkle. The bright, animated girl I had met weeks ago now seemed fragile, almost as if each movement required careful calculation to avoid drawing attention to herself. Her eyes darted to the window at every noise outside, and when I approached, she offered a small, tentative smile that barely reached her eyes. Sitting down beside her, I tried to tread carefully. "Hey, Nina," I began softly. "I just wanted to see how you're feeling today. You seemed a little off yesterday." She glanced down at her hands, twisting the hem of her sweater again. "I'm okay," she muttered, her voice trailing off, but her fidgeting, the slight tremor in her hands, and the way her gaze avoided mine said otherwise. I waited, letting silence stretch just long enough to encourage her to open up, though every second made me more aware of how delicate this moment was. Finally, she exhaled sharply, as if releasing a secret she hadn't planned to share. I don't feel like myself anymore," she admitted, her words barely audible. "Jamie likes it when I wear wigs. When I do my hair a certain way, I feel like I'm pretending, and it's exhausting." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about makeup or appearance. It was about identity, about feeling pressured to conform to someone else's idea of cool. And at 13, that weight was enormous. I nodded slowly, carefully choosing my words. "I understand, Nina. Sometimes we do things to fit in or to make people like us, even when it doesn't feel right. I did the same things when I was your age. But the most important thing is that you choose what makes you feel confident, not anyone else." Her lips quivered slightly, and I could see her processing, weighing, questioning whether she had the right to prioritize her feelings over others' expectations. What struck me most was how layered this all was, so much more than simple teenage insecurity. I realized that Nina's struggle wasn't just personal, it was cultural, social, and emotional all at once. Natural hair carried meanings and judgments in ways I could only begin to grasp. And now she was trying to navigate her feelings for Jamie, her sense of self, and the subtle pressures of a society that didn't always affirm her identity. The complexity was staggering, and I felt simultaneously protective and powerless. As we talked, I tried to tread that fine line between guidance and intrusion. "You know," I said carefully, "it's okay to experiment, to try different styles, to see what works for you. But don't let anyone make you feel like you're wrong for who you are. Your hair, your style, those are yours." She nodded, a fragile understanding flickering in her eyes. But I could tell that the conversation, while perhaps comforting, on the surface, had also awakened a new level of self-awareness and anxiety by the time I left her house. I felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. I was acutely aware that each word I spoke, each gesture I made, could either empower or further unsettle her. And as I drove home, replaying the conversation in my mind, I couldn't shake the gnawing awareness that the tension wasn't over. It had only begun, and I was now entangled in a situation far more complex than I had anticipated, a delicate triangle of trust, care, and cultural boundaries that I had to navigate carefully if I wanted to support both Jamie and Nina without causing more harm than good. The next few days were a test of patience, observation, and subtlety. I found myself constantly checking in, not in a controlling way, but out of concern, trying to gauge whether Nina was slowly regaining her confidence or slipping further into withdrawal. At school drop-offs and casual meets, I noticed small signs that unsettled me. Her laughter, once easy and unrestrained, was quieter, punctuated by pauses, almost as if she was waiting for someone to judge her every expression. She walked slightly behind Jamie, her posture hesitant, hands clutching her backpack straps as if they were a shield from the scrutiny she imagined around her. Even small interactions revealed the complexity of what she was feeling. During lunch one day at a local cafe, she asked Jamie for advice on her outfit, and he casually suggested she should try something edgier, referencing her usual choice to wear her natural hair instead of the wigs she sometimes favored. I could see the conflict play out in her expression, a flicker of desire to please, a hesitation born from uncertainty, and a subtle but unmistakable sadness. My heart ached. Here was a girl trying to navigate friendship, first love, and identity, while contending with a world that often judged her before understanding her. At home, Jamie was noticeably defensive. Every time I mentioned Nina or asked how things were going, his tone sharpened slightly. "Mum, don't lecture her about how she looks. You don't understand," he said one evening, his words tinged with frustration and protectiveness. It struck me just how deeply he cared about her autonomy and, unknowingly, how tightly he was holding on to his own understanding of right and wrong. My intention had been to comfort Nina, yet in doing so, I had unknowingly disrupted the delicate balance between Jamie and her, inserting myself into a space where my presence was both welcomed and resented. Meanwhile, Nina's behavior began to reflect her internal conflict more vividly. On the surface, she tried to maintain composure, chatting politely, smiling when spoken to, but small cues betrayed her uncertainty. She would nervously adjust her hair, glance at her reflection in shop windows, and hesitate when engaging in conversations that required confidence. I watched helplessly, realizing that no amount of well-meaning advice could be instantaneously fix what was clearly a multi-layered struggle. My role, I understood, was not to solve the problem, but to support her in finding her own footing. I tried different approaches. I encouraged her to embrace whatever made her feel comfortable, reminded her subtly that Jamie liked her for who she was, and even suggested she could try the wig if it made her feel safer, but always framed as a choice, never a requirement. Still, Each interaction left me more acutely aware of the cultural nuances at play. I was a white woman, and no matter how careful or sensitive I was, I could never fully inhabit her world or understand the subtle pressures she faced as a black teenager, even one as bright and resilient as Nina. One afternoon, as I drove Jamie and Nina to a local community event, the tension reached another level. Nina was unusually quiet in the back seat, fiddling with her bracelet, while Jamie spoke animatedly about the event. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, noticing the slight downturn of her mouth, the way her eyes avoided mine. I felt a pang of helplessness. My desire to nurture and protect collided with the reality that my involvement was limited, and sometimes even unintended guidance could feel like pressure. I realized that I needed to step back, not entirely withdraw, but to give space for Nina to navigate these choices herself. At the same time, I knew I had to maintain trust with Jamie, who was increasingly sensitive about how I interacted with her. Balancing the two required careful observation, emotional intelligence, and an acute awareness that any misstep could be magnified in the eyes of teenagers navigating the fragile world of identity, self-expression, and early romantic relationships. By the time we arrived at the community center, I felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. I parked, helping Nina and Jamie out of the car, and I watched her take a deep breath before stepping forward. She was still uncertain, still cautious, but there was a subtle shift, small glimmer of bravery in the way she lifted her chin, held her shoulders a little straighter, and followed Jamie into the bustling crowd. It was a tiny victory, almost imperceptibly, but it reminded me that resilience often comes in small, quiet steps rather than grand gestures. As I settled into my car afterward, I couldn't stop replaying the past few days in my mind. Every decision I had made, every word spoken, every suggestion offered seemed to echo in my thoughts. A constant reminder that even well-intentioned actions carry consequences. I was learning, perhaps too slowly, that parenting, or even simply caring about someone's well-being, required not only empathy, but also humility. Humility to recognize when my help might overstep, when my perspective was limited, and when silence or restraint might be more valuable than words. And so, the tension lingered, threaded through every interaction, shaping the dynamics between Nina, Jamie, and me. Each smile that flickered across her face, each cautious laugh, each small moment of self-assertion became a victory, a reminder that growth was messy, slow, and often unseen. But it was happening, nonetheless, a quiet drama unfolding behind the scenes, invisible to the outside world, yet profoundly felt by those of us immersed in it. It was late afternoon when I realized that the simmering tension between all of us had reached a boiling point. Jamie had been unusually quiet since we left the community center, his usual banter replaced by a tense, closed-off silence. Nina, sitting beside him in the back seat, fidgeted with her hoodie strings, her gaze darting from window to window as if she were trying to escape the confines of the car itself. I kept stealing glances at them in the rearview mirror, feeling the weight of every unspoken thought between them and between me and them, like an invisible fog pressing down on my chest. Jamie, I started cautiously, trying to break the silence without triggering another outburst. Can we talk about yesterday? About what I said to Nina? He didn't answer immediately, his jaw, tight eyes fixed forward. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and I knew I was stepping onto dangerous ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but charged with emotion. "Mum, You have no idea. You can't just tell her how to feel about her hair or her look. You're a white woman. You don't get it. You can't get it. You're crossing a line." His words hit me harder than I expected. The reality of my overstepped the cultural and emotional boundaries I hadn't fully considered became unavoidable. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that my intention was only to comfort Nina, to let her know she had choices and didn't have to feel pressured to conform. But Jamie didn't give me the chance. "You're acting like some kind of Karen," he spat out, the word sharp and biting. "You're giving her advice that's not yours to give. You don't know what it's like to be her. You don't know anything about what she goes through." The word Karen echoed in my mind, unfamiliar yet perfectly illustrative of the anger and frustration radiating from him. My stomach twisted, my heart raced, and for the first time that day, I felt utterly powerless. I had entered this delicate space with the best of intentions, and now I was being accused of something I hadn't even realized I was doing wrong. Every word I had spoken to Nina, every suggestion, every attempt to ease her insecurities, all felt tainted by my own ignorance. Nina's eyes, visible in the corner of my rearview mirror, were wide and uncertain. I could sense her discomfort, a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and unease. My presence, meant to reassure, now seemed to amplify the pressure she felt. She shifted in her seat, wrapping her arms around herself in a protective gesture, and I realized that no words I offered at this point could untangle the web I had inadvertently woven. I tried again, my voice calm but earnest. "Jamie, I was only trying to help. I didn't mean to overstep, and I certainly didn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable." He didn't respond, only tightening his grip on the steering wheel, jaw clenched. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with all the unspoken tensions of race, adolescence, and the complex dynamics of our little trio. The drive home felt endless. I kept glancing at Nina, who avoided eye contact, her small hands clutching the edge of the seat. Every sigh, every hesitant movement, every downward glance reminded me of how sensitive this situation had become. The line between supporting someone and imposing my perspective was so fine, and I had crossed it without realizing. I thought I was helping, but the fallout was immediate, raw, and unavoidable. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew that the events of the past days had irrevocably shifted the dynamics between all of us. Jamie stormed inside, slamming the door behind him, leaving Nina and me in the quiet car. She turned to me, her eyes flicking nervously, searching for some sign that everything was okay. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that my intentions were pure, but the words stuck in my throat. The truth was complicated. What I thought was guidance had been perceived as intrusion, and navigating the aftermath would require more care than I could yet comprehend. Nina finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to make him angry, She trailed off, her words caught somewhere between apology and confusion. I reached over, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to explain yourself to me, Nina," I said softly. "You have the right to feel comfortable being yourself. No one, not even Jamie, can take that from you. And you don't have to choose between making him happy and being yourself." She nodded slowly, the tiniest flicker of relief in her eyes. I knew that the road ahead would be complicated, that moments like this would continue to test the boundaries between intention and perception, care and interference. But I also understood that our connection, however fragile, was worth nurturing with patience. humility, and a willingness to listen more than I spoke. That night, as I lay in bed, replaying the day in my mind, I realized that parenting or guiding young people through the labyrinth of adolescence was less about having the right answers and more about holding space. Space for mistakes, space for growth, space for understanding, and space for love. It was messy, tense, and full of drama. It was real, and for now, that was enough. The days after the car incident felt heavier than any ordinary weekday should. Jamie had retreated into his room for hours on end, headphones blaring, texting rapidly on his phone with friends who didn't know the tension vibrating through our house. I kept wondering if he would ever come out of that bubble, if he would forgive my intrusion, or if he even understood why I had acted the way I did. My role as a mother felt suddenly small and inadequate, a mix of good intentions clashing with unintended consequences. Meanwhile, Nina became quieter, more cautious in our interactions. She would smile when Jamie was around, but there was a subtle distance in her eyes, a hint of apprehension that wasn't there before. During a brief visit at our home, she lingered near the doorway, touching her hair absent-mindedly, adjusting the neckline of her sweater, avoiding eye contact. It struck me as a visible representation of her internal struggle, the balancing act of trying to maintain a friendship with Jamie, trying to satisfy unspoken expectations, and trying to assert her own identity. One afternoon, while Jamie was distracted playing video games upstairs, I found myself alone with Nina in the living room. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. I knew I had to approach gently, lest I push her further into herself. "Nina," I began softly, "I hope you know that what happened the other day. It's okay to feel upset, confused, or frustrated. You're navigating a lot, and that's completely normal." She looked up, her eyes briefly meeting mine before darting away. I could sense the mixture of gratitude and discomfort swirling within her, a delicate storm I had to navigate carefully. I feel like I'm letting everyone down," she whispered, finally giving voice to the pressure I had sensed but hadn't fully understood. "Jamie, my friends, even you, sometimes. I don't know how to just be me without disappointing someone." Her words hit me hard. I realized that beyond the simple struggle with hair and appearance, Nina was contending with an invisible weight of expectations, social, cultural, and emotional, all pressing down on her shoulders. I nodded, carefully weighing each word before speaking. "You can't control how others see you, Nina, and you shouldn't have to. The most important thing is how you see yourself. You deserve to feel comfortable, confident, and proud of who you are, without needing anyone else's approval." I watched her process, the subtle shift in her posture suggesting that my words had landed, if only slightly. It was a delicate reassurance, not a solution, but sometimes, I realized, reassurance was all one could offer. Then she admitted something I hadn't anticipated. "Sometimes I feel like if I wear a wig, Jamie will like me more, and maybe everyone else will, too. But then I feel like I'm hiding, and that makes me, I don't know, fake." Her voice trembled, her eyes glistening. I could see that this was more than a superficial dilemma. It was a tug-of-war between authenticity and acceptance, a conflict I had seen teenagers struggle with before, but never so raw, so vulnerable, and so culturally nuanced. I reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Nina, being yourself isn't always easy. Sometimes it's scary, and people might not understand. But hiding who you are for someone else, That's not fair to you. You deserve to be seen for who you really are." She took a shaky breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch, as if anchoring herself to the reality that she was allowed to make her own choices. I felt a flicker of hope, a small fragile spark, that maybe she could reclaim some of the confidence she had lost. Yet, despite the momentary reassurance, I knew the tension with Jamie wasn't going away. The car ride incident had shifted something between us. His protective instincts were heightened. His awareness of racial and cultural dynamics sharpened, and I could see that every step I took toward supporting Nina now had to be measured, carefully considered, and thoughtful. Missteps could reopen wounds, create resentment, or, worst of all, make Nina feel trapped between two worlds, the expectations of her peers and the desire for autonomy in her identity. As we sat in the living room, I realized that adolescence wasn't just messy, it was a battlefield of self-expression, cultural nuance, and emotional growth. And I, a mother who wanted to guide and protect, was forced to confront my own limitations. My good intentions had collided with realities I hadn't fully grasped, and I had to learn quickly how to navigate this terrain with empathy, patience, and humility. By the time Nina left that afternoon, there was a subtle shift. Her steps were lighter, her smile smaller but genuine, a cautious reclaiming of confidence. I knew the journey ahead would be long and filled with small victories and setbacks, but for the first time in days, I felt a tentative optimism. We were still entangled in this delicate triangle of relationships, culture, and adolescence, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could navigate it together, with care, understanding, and respect. That evening, tension hung over the house like a thick fog. Jamie barely touched his dinner, picking at food with mechanical movements, eyes darting to his phone as if waiting for some distraction to whisk him away from the unease he felt in our living room. I tried to engage, to ask about his day, to check in without pushing, but every attempt seemed to bounce off him, landing nowhere. The incident from the car ride still clung to us, unspoken but heavy, making even ordinary conversation feel loaded with potential conflict. Later, while Jamie was retreating to his room, I overheard a faint knock at the door. "Nina." My heart lurched, half with relief and half with apprehension. I opened it cautiously, trying to create a safe space without imposing. She stepped in, clutching her backpack straps tightly, her natural hair framing her face in soft waves. The sparkle of her usual smile was muted, replaced with a delicate caution, the kind that makes you want to protect someone from a world that often judges too harshly. "Hey, Nina," I said gently, keeping my voice low, "come sit down for a moment. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward Jamie's closed door, and then nodded, settling on the couch across from me. I could see she was bracing herself, aware of the invisible minefield of our interactions, a mixture of teenage caution and awareness of cultural dynamics I couldn't fully inhabit. I just don't know what to do," she admitted quietly, voice trembling. "I feel like no matter what I choose, I'm disappointing someone. Jamie, he likes one thing, and I feel like I'm letting him down, and then I feel like I'm letting myself down too." Her words landed with a heaviness that left me momentarily speechless. It wasn't just about hair or appearance. It was about the tension between identity, affection, and societal expectation. The weight on her shoulders, invisible to anyone else, was crushingly real. I reached out, keeping my hand just near hers, careful not to overstep. "Nina, you're not responsible for anyone else's happiness, especially not by changing yourself. You deserve to make choices that make you feel confident and comfortable, not because someone else wants you to. Her fingers twitched as if she wanted to grasp mine but hesitated, caught in the liminal space between reassurance and self-doubt. I knew this was going to be a long process, that each conversation, each gentle nudge, would have to be measured carefully to support her without imposing my own perspective. Meanwhile, Jamie's presence or absence hovered over the room like a silent guardian. I could feel Nina calculating how her words might be received, how any admission of uncertainty might be judged. Adolescence is complicated enough, but when coupled with cultural dynamics and the subtleties of racial identity, it became almost unbearably layered. I had to remind myself that while my guidance came from a place of concern, it was filtered through my own experiences, my own limitations, and my identity a white mother, attempting to navigate a space where cultural context mattered as much as intent. She sighed, resting her head briefly against the couch cushion, a small gesture of weariness. I just wish I could be me, but sometimes it feels like being me isn't enough. Not for him, not for anyone. The honesty of her words struck me deeply. She wasn't seeking approval. She was seeking permission from herself, from the world, and in some ways, from my to exist without compromise. I nodded slowly, careful to let her process my words, rather than rushing to fix anything. You don't need permission to be yourself, Nina. You just need to own it, even when it's scary, even when people don't understand. The choice is yours, and it always has been. A small flicker of relief passed through her eyes, but the shadow of anxiety lingered. I realized that reassurance, no matter how heartfelt, was only the first step. The real challenge was helping her navigate the social pressures that made even ordinary choices feel like monumental decisions by the time she left. I could sense a subtle shift. Her posture was a little straighter, her steps a little more confident. But the tension remained, a reminder that adolescence, identity, and first love were rarely straightforward. And as I watched her walk to the door, I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, moments where Jamie's protectiveness, my well-meaning advice, and Nina's desire to assert herself would intersect in unpredictable ways. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I reflected on the fragility of these connections. Teenagers are resilient in ways adults sometimes forget, but they are also profoundly sensitive to the slightest misstep, the smallest comment, or even a glance that carries unintended weight. Supporting them meant listening more than speaking, observing more than instructing, and recognizing that my role wasn't to dictate, but to provide a safe space for growth. And yet, I couldn't shake the awareness that the balance was precarious. One wrong word, one misplaced gesture, and the fragile trust I was building with Nina could unravel. The drama was far from over. It had only deepened, threading itself through our days and nights, shaping interactions and amplifying emotions in ways that were invisible to anyone outside our small, charged triangle. By the time the clock struck midnight, I was exhausted not from physical labor, but from navigating emotional minefields, cultural nuance, and the delicate art of caring without controlling. I knew that the days ahead would demand patience, humility, and vigilance, as every action had the potential to either heal or hurt, support or hinder. But one thing was clear: I couldn't abandon the effort. For Jamie, for Nina, and for the fragile trust between us, I had to keep trying, even if the path forward was uncertain, messy, and full of tension. By midweek, the atmosphere in our house had shifted into something almost unrecognizable. Even the air felt heavier, laden with unsaid words and simmering emotions. Jamie barely spoke to me during the day, retreating further into his room, headphones on, isolating himself in a cocoon of video games and music. I tried to respect his space, but each quiet glance toward his closed door reminded me that the incident in the car had left a deeper scar than I initially realized. I felt like I was tiptoeing through a minefield of his feelings, unsure when or if I might trigger another explosion. Meanwhile, Nina's presence became increasingly fragile. She would visit occasionally, smiling politely, but her usual buoyancy was absent. Her laughter had diminished into short, careful chuckles, and her movements were tentative, as if every step carried the weight of judgment or imagined. During a brief afternoon visit, I noticed her hesitating at the doorway, adjusting the hem of her sweater, fingers twisting at the straps of her backpack, avoiding eye contact. It was as if the smallest action could betray her vulnerability, the delicate balance she had to maintain between her sense of self and the expectations of others. One particular evening, Jamie emerged from his room with a scowl, clearly having overheard my brief exchange with Nina in the living room. I had merely offered her a gentle reassurance. You deserve to be yourself, Nina. No one else gets to decide how you should feel about yourself. Jamie's face darkened instantly. Mom, he snapped, stop telling her what to do with her hair, what to wear, what's okay. You don't understand. You can't. You're a white woman. You don't get it. You're crossing a line. The words hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to explain, to clarify that I only intended to support Nina, but he wasn't willing to hear it. His frustration and protectiveness so fierce and immediate shook me to my core. I realized then that my well-intentioned advice had collided head-on with cultural and generational boundaries I didn't fully comprehend. My words, meant to uplift, had been perceived as intrusion, judgment, even overreach. Nina, who had been quietly seated on the couch, flinched at Jamie's tone. Her hands gripped the edge of her backpack as if anchoring herself to the moment. Her eyes wide with a mixture of fear, guilt, and shame. I could see the internal conflict writ large across her face, the desire to assert her own identity, the fear of disappointing Jamie, and the uncertainty of navigating a world where well-meaning advice could feel like criticism. I tried again, my voice calm, gentle, but firm. Jamie, I'm not trying to tell her what to do. I just want her to feel confident being herself. That's all. He shook his head violently, voice rising, face reddening. You don't get it. You're not her. You don't understand what she faces every day. This isn't about confidence. This is about identity. You're overstepping. You're acting like a Karen. The words stung sharply, echoing through the room like a warning bell. I felt a mixture of shock, guilt, and helplessness. Every attempt to support Nina now felt loaded with the potential to make things worse. And yet, I couldn't simply step back entirely, not when I saw the way she wrestled with her feelings, trying to navigate first love, cultural expectations, and her own self-image. After a tense silence, Nina finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. I don't want to fight. I don't want anyone to be angry at me. I just want to feel like me, even for a little while. Her words were simple but heavy, capturing the emotional stakes in the room. I realized then that this wasn't just a disagreement. It was a pivotal moment in her adolescence, a defining instance of identity versus expectation, individuality versus the desire for approval. Jamie, still simmering, eventually stormed to his room, slamming the door with a force that rattled the house. The tension hung like a thick fog. I sat down next to Nina, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're allowed to be yourself, Nina. You don't have to choose between making Jamie happy and being who you really are. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to make choices that are right for you." She exhaled, a fragile yet meaningful release, as if finally allowing herself to breathe. That night, I lay awake reflecting on the day's events. The delicate triangle between Jamie, Nina, and me had shifted in ways I couldn't reverse. My well-meaning intervention had sparked conflict, unearthed insecurities, and forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about identity, cultural boundaries, and adolescence. Yet, beneath the tension, I also recognized a seed of growth, a recognition that navigating these complexities, while messy and painful, was part of the process of learning empathy, understanding, and trust. The events of the week had left me emotionally exhausted, but they had also taught me an invaluable lesson. Sometimes, the most profound support doesn't come from advice or guidance, but from presence, patience, and respect for the choices and identities of those we care about. And as I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to listen, to understand, and to help Nina and Jamie find their own paths through this intricate, emotional landscape. The morning after the stormy night, the house felt quieter, almost fragile in its stillness. Jamie had stayed in his room, headphones muted this time, scrolling on his phone in a subdued silence. The previous evening's argument had left ripples that none of us could ignore. I knew I had to approach carefully, mindful of boundaries, but I also couldn't abandon the opportunity to repair the fragile trust that hung between us. Nina arrived later in the morning, her presence tentative but determined. She seemed to have gathered some courage overnight, evident in the way she held her shoulders straighter and offered a more genuine smile than I had seen in days. The bright spark that had been dimmed by self-doubt and pressure was flickering again, a small but significant sign that resilience was beginning to emerge. We settled into the living room, and for the first time in days, the conversation began, without tension. I encouraged her to speak freely about how she felt, reassuring her that there were no judgments here. She hesitated at first, as if measuring her words carefully, and then spoke about the pressure she had felt to look a certain way for Jamie, for her peers, and even for herself. Her honesty was raw, the kind that only emerges when trust is slowly rebuilt, and I listened intently, careful not to interrupt or impose. I reminded her gently that self-expression was personal and fluid, and that it was okay to experiment, to make mistakes, and to assert her individuality. Her eyes brightened slightly, the first real sparkle I had seen in days. As she nodded and spoke about small choices, she wanted to make choices that honored her own sense of beauty and confidence, regardless of external approval. The relief was palpable. It was as if a weight she hadn't fully realized she was carrying had begun to lift by the time she left. There was a quiet understanding between us. It wasn't a resolution, not entirely, but a step toward balance. Nina was reclaiming autonomy, and I was learning to support without overstepping. I knew the next challenge would be Jamie, and I braced myself for the delicate dance of rebuilding trust with him, acknowledging his protective instincts and validating his feelings while still advocating for Nina's right to self-expression. Later that afternoon, Jamie finally emerged from his room, his expression guarded but calmer than I had seen in days. We sat down together, and I chose my words carefully, emphasizing empathy, understanding, and respect. I acknowledged his frustration, validating that my intervention had felt intrusive from his perspective, and I reassured him that my intentions were rooted in care, not control. The conversation was tentative, punctuated by pauses as he processed my words. But slowly, the tension began to ease. He admitted, quietly, that he had been scared, too scared of Nina being hurt, scared of her losing confidence, and scared of the world not understanding her in the ways he could. It was a vulnerable admission, one that revealed the depth of his care and the pressure he had felt to protect her. I nodded, expressing appreciation for his perspective, and explained that my role wasn't to replace his guidance, but to support both of them in navigating these challenges safely and respectfully. By evening, the three of us shared a quiet dinner. Together, a subtle but meaningful step toward reconciliation. Nina laughed softly at Jamie's playful teasing, and he responded with a small smile, the tension from earlier days beginning to dissolve. It was a delicate equilibrium, fragile but promising, and I realized that healing and understanding weren't instantaneous. They were built in small moments of trust, patience, and honesty. The following week brought a noticeable change. Nina arrived at our home with a newfound confidence, her natural hair styled in a way that expressed her personality rather than conforming to expectations. The sparkle in her eyes was returning, her laughter light and genuine. Jamie observed quietly, occasionally offering a compliment, and I could sense that both teenagers were beginning to navigate their relationship with a better understanding of boundaries, mutual respect, and authenticity. During a long afternoon in the park, we watched them interact with friends, laughing freely and exchanging playful banter. The tension that had gripped previous days was replaced by a sense of ease, though beneath it all lay the lessons they had learned about trust, communication, and self-respect. It was subtle, but the transformation was real. Nina was reclaiming her confidence, and Jamie was learning that supporting someone didn't mean controlling them. I felt a quiet sense of pride, tempered with humility, recognizing that my role had been both a challenge and a lesson. I had learned the importance of listening, observing, and restraining myself, while still offering guidance rooted in care. It was a delicate balance, one that would continue to evolve, but the progress we had made was undeniable. By the end of the week, the house felt lighter, the atmosphere freer. Conversations flowed naturally again, laughter returned, and the tension that had shadowed every interaction seemed to dissipate. Jamie and Nina were still learning, still navigating adolescence, but there was a visible respect for individuality, an unspoken understanding that authenticity mattered more than appearances. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set, Nina leaned back and smiled, the ease in her posture reflecting the confidence she had regained. Jamie reached over to adjust her scarf playfully, a silent acknowledgement of support rather than control, and I, sitting nearby, felt a profound sense of relief and hope. The drama, tension, and emotional turbulence of the past days had brought lessons, growth, and stronger bonds. In that moment, I realized that the journey wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, patience, and the willingness to navigate the complexities of adolescence with empathy and understanding. And while challenges would undoubtedly arise again, we had discovered the power of listening, respecting boundaries, and supporting one another in ways that honored both identity and individuality. It was messy, it was emotional, and it was real, and somehow that made it all the more meaningful.